Thunder rolled above the Dante estate like a warning from God himself. Rain crawled down the black iron gates, washing over a mansion that had forgotten what peace sounded like. Inside those endless marble halls, every clock ticked like a countdown to madness. And at the center of it all, William Dante, the ruthless mafia boss of Chicago, sat awake. He always sat awake. For 10 years, the most feared mafia boss in the country had not slept through a single night. Not after the fire. Not after the screams. Not after the blood that stained his hands so deeply even time could not wash it away. Doctors failed him. Priests feared him. Women avoided his eyes after midnight. Because the moment William Dante closed them, the dead came back. So every night, he remained imprisoned in the silence between heartbeats, smoking cigarette after cigarette while darkness swallowed the mansion whole. The city called him ruthless, untouchable, a devil in an expensive suit. But the truth was far worse. William Dante was a man slowly losing his mind. Then, on the coldest storm of the year, she arrived. A new maid. Quiet, soft-spoken, too calm for a house filled with monsters. Abigail entered the mansion carrying only one suitcase and a secret buried so deep it had followed her into every nightmare she ever survived. The servants whispered the moment they saw her. Something about the girl felt wrong or maybe terrifyingly familiar. And that same night, for the first time in 10 years, William Dante fell asleep. Not for minutes. Not for moments. But for 6 uninterrupted hours. The entire mansion froze in fear. Because the last time William Dante slept peacefully, people died. And when he finally opened his eyes the next morning, he looked at the new maid as if he had seen her before. Somewhere in another life. Somewhere inside the fire. Would you stay inside a house where the devil only sleeps beside one woman? If you found yourself standing in that mansion, face to face with the devil who hasn't slept in 10 years, would you try to save him or run? Tell me in the comments below and subscribe for more stories that dare you to feel the darkness. The Dante mansion stood on the hillside like a grave pretending to be a home. Even the rain seemed afraid to touch its walls for long. Every corridor echoed with hollow footsteps that had once belonged to the living. Every portrait on the wall stared out with the grief of witnesses trapped in time. The marble gleamed under weak lamplight, too polished, too wet-looking, as if the house itself was sweating out memories it couldn't bury. William Dante moved through that silence as though it belonged to him, because it did. Every click of his shoes was a law, every movement cold and deliberate. The city called him powerful, ruthless, untouchable. Inside these walls he was something worse, awake, always awake. His world existed between dusk and dawn, built upon discipline, rage, and the dread of closing his eyes. For 10 years he had not slept. Below the grandeur of his rooms, the servants whispered stories that grew darker with every retelling. They said the boss never switched off his lights, that if you crossed the top landing after midnight, you would hear packing. Slow, steady, endless, as though the devil himself couldn't find peace in his own palace. The oldest worker claimed the house hadn't truly rested since the night of the fire. When the new maid arrived under a wash of cold rain, nobody met her gaze for long. Abigail's hands were small, careful, her voice quiet enough to vanish in the storm's growl. The housekeeper told her what everyone knew: never look at Mr. Dante, never speak unless spoken to, and never walk near the door at the end of the east corridor, the one without a handle. But curiosity stirs even in those born to silence. Her first night passed in the uneasy company of shadows. The wind crawled through the cracks like whispers learning her name. Twice she thought she saw movement in the mirrors, nothing certain, only suggestions. Once, as she crossed the dim hallway, she felt it, a presence standing behind her, still and watching, though when she turned, there was only her reflection. Beneath the stairs, in a narrow room meant for no one's comfort, Abigail lay awake long after midnight. The storm pressed its weight against the windows, sheets of rain drumming like restless fingers. Above her ceiling, footfalls began measured, ceaseless. She counted them, sinking her breath to the rhythm until thunder broke it apart. Then suddenly the house went still. The wind stopped. Even the rain seemed unsure. The silence that fell was not peace but transformation, thick, unnatural, final, and somewhere beyond her ceiling the packing ended. The mansion, which had breathed unease for a decade, seemed to draw one deep, tremulous breath and exhale. Dawn crept sluggishly across the Dante estate, bleeding silver through the heavy curtains as if the sky were too weary to rise. The world outside was pale and waterlogged. The storm had not stopped, only learned to whisper. Inside, William Dante sat motionless at the head of a spotless dining table, the untouched breakfast steaming softly beside him. The newspaper before him remained unread, the words a meaningless pattern of ink. A man made of precision and control, he noticed small details no one else could. Yet this morning, he felt himself noticing nothing. It was disorienting, this strange stillness in his blood. Years of sleepless discipline had shaped him into something close to machine, yet there was a slight tremor beneath the surface of his chest, the faintest echo of peace trembling where rage used to live. When movement flickered across the reflection of the glass table, he looked up, instinctive, sharp. It was the new maid, gliding past the far end of the hall with a tray. There was nothing remarkable about her in motion, and yet his heart behaved as though memory had brushed it. She moved with the quiet composure of someone accustomed to storms, her stillness deliberate, as if aware the world might shatter at sudden sound. For a moment neither knew the other had been seen, but something old and wordless connected them, a thread pulled taut between two ghosts disguised as the living. That night, a new electricity hummed through the house. The air felt densely human again. Abigail lingered near the servants' corridor long after lights out, each step guided by some compelling vibration she couldn't name. She stopped beneath the ceiling that separated her from his room. The house was breathing differently, slower, softer. Upstairs, the man the city called a monster sat in silence as rain licked the edges of his window. And in that silence, the impossible happened. His eyes drifted closed. His body, trained for years to reject surrender, yielded at last. For the first time in a decade, William Dante slept. Abigail didn't know how long she stood there. Only that she heard it, a faint, unguarded exhale, soft as prayer. The house, starved of dreams for 10 years, finally fell silent. Whispers bloomed through the house like fire over oil. He slept. Two impossible words passed from servant to servant until even the marble walls seemed to hum with disbelief. The guards traded glances as though they'd seen a ghost. No one spoke his name aloud, fearing to break the fragile magic of it. When William appeared that morning, the change was small but undeniable. His walk no longer carried thunder. His silence had edges still, yet it no longer bled. The darkness in his eyes had softened, unsettled by something gentler, something he didn't yet trust. Sleep had come, but it brought no peace. Behind his composed expression lay the raw ache of dreams half-remembered. Fragments chased him between breaths, the glow of fire licking red against walls, a woman's voice breaking into a scream, the echo of a lullaby swallowed by smoke. When he awoke before dawn, the sensations clung to him like heat he couldn't wash away. He told himself it was nothing, just memory pretending to be mercy. Abigail worked silently through the day, yet she stole quick, searching looks at him as if her own pulse had begun to echo his. Their paths crossed mid-morning, and when she set a tray before him, their fingertips brushed just once. It was accidental, but electricity burned between them. Both stilled, as though a familiar pain had called them by name. Later that evening, under the faint glow of her candle, Abigail noticed a scar on her palm she had never truly studied before. A thin, smooth burn, half-faded but old. The same mark she had glimpsed on his hand that morning when the cuff of his sleeve slipped. Two wounds mirrored years apart, carved from the same unseen fire. That night when she closed her eyes, the world filled with heat and sound. She was small again, trapped behind a wall of smoke, reaching through the blaze for someone she could not see. A hand was there, strong and trembling, lifting her, carrying her toward the light. The last thing she heard before everything collapsed was a man's voice shouting her name, though she couldn't remember ever being called by it. She woke gasping, the taste of ash still on her tongue. Above her, in his room, William Dante did not sleep again. He sat in darkness with his hand pressed to the old scar, the faint smell of burns still lingering in his memory. The weather refused to break. Rain had settled over the Dante estate like punishment, sinking into the bones of the house, blurring the line between night and day. The staff moved quietly through the gloom, carrying fear the way others carried lamps. Only Abigail seemed untouched by the heaviness. Her soft steps became part of the house's rhythm, her silence a strange comfort to the restless air. She found refuge in the library, a cathedral of old dust and forgotten knowledge. The scent of ink, smoke, and time wrapped around her as she wandered between the shelves. Books lay like sleeping hearts, and for the first time since entering the mansion, she felt unseen eyes soften rather than watch. When her fingers brushed open a hollow-backed volume, something slid out. A photograph faded to sepia. A woman with laughter still in her eyes held a small child on her hip. Behind them stood a younger William Dante, his face shadowed with something that wasn't yet ruin, but was already reaching for it. The warmth of that captured moment burned against the present chill. She hadn't heard his footsteps, yet suddenly he was there, filling the doorway like a storm given form. The air around him turned sharp, cold, absolute. Every instinct in her body told her to lower her gaze, but curiosity was stronger. For an instant, their eyes met, and something too old for words passed between them, grief recognizing itself. She placed the photograph back on the desk and turned away. Later that night, as she prepared for bed, she found the same photograph beneath her pillow. The discovery stole her breath. He must have placed it there, or someone wanted her to believe so. Beneath the soft growl of thunder, she thought she heard faint whispers along the corridor, a voice repeating her name so quietly she could have mistaken it for wind. When the storm finally broke open over the roof, the mansion answered with its usual silence. Yet through the thick veil of rain, a lullaby drifted, low, steady, heartbreakingly familiar. The tune threaded through the darkness as though memory itself was walking the halls. Abigail froze. It was the same song from her dreams, the one she could never remember learning. At that very moment, William moved through the house as if drawn by an invisible thread. The sound led him down the long corridor lined with mirrors until he found it ending just outside her room. Candlelight flickered under her door, spilling gold across the marble floor. He did not enter. He only stood there, breathing slow for the first time in years. And as her voice faded into the hush of sleep, he slid down the wall, resting his head against the cold stone. The storm snarled beyond the windows, but inside, something unthinkable happened. For the first time in 10 years, the devil closed his eyes, and the house dared not make a sound. Days unfolded with a fragile, hesitant calm, as though the house itself was relearning how to breathe. For the first time in a decade, the Dante mansion no longer throbbed with sleepless tension. The once ceaseless packing in the halls ceased, the midnight lights stayed dim. Even the guards whispered differently now, quietly, incredulously, saying their boss no longer roared like thunder, that the edge of rage once cut into every breath he took had softened to something dangerously human. The transformation unnerved them. Power was easier to understand when it was cruel. Laughter, even a nervous flicker of it, felt like blasphemy in a house built from silence. But in the kitchens, it happened anyway. A servant's muffled joke, a pot clattering without punishment, a sigh of disbelief that didn't end in fear. Something had shifted, and every wall could feel it. Abigail noticed it most. The cold that once lived in William Dante's eyes now fractured under moments of thought he couldn't explain. He had become quieter, not from control but from confusion. Rest had returned to him, yet peace had teeth. He often lingered near her hallway at night, not close enough to see, only near enough that she could sense him, a presence like gravity itself. When she whispered good night into the dark, the air changed. Somewhere beyond the walls, his breath deepened, syncing with her own in a rhythm older than the house. Still, this calm belonged to a storm waiting for its cue. Shadows gathered behind the curtains of civility. Alessandro, his lieutenant, the man who had survived beside him through wars of blood, had begun to watch her too long, too often. He noticed the way William's eyes followed her. He heard the silence between their breaths and named it danger. Loyalty to the boss had always meant protecting his kingdom, even from himself. He whispered to the guards when William wasn't there, calling her a ghost from the past, a weapon wrapped in kindness. The words festered. The house began to tremble again under the return of mistrust, but Abigail kept her composure, her face unreadable, her heart slow and heavy with knowledge she could barely hold. When she passed a mirror in the corridor one night, her reflection flickered under candlelight, a second image behind her shoulder, gone in an instant, but enough to make her pause. She lifted a hand to her chest, feeling the invisible thread that tied her to him pull tighter. Outside, lightning crawled through the clouds. The air in the house shifted, charged with premonition. The peace that had dared to bloom inside the walls felt fragile, unnatural, doomed to be tested. Abigail closed her eyes and whispered to no one, "They'll come for us soon." And somewhere upstairs, William stirred from uneasy half-sleep, certain he had heard her voice call his name. Something unnatural is happening inside the Dante estate. Do you think the maid is his salvation or his downfall? Drop your theory in the comments, and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what happens when the truth finally wakes. It was William who broke the fragile rhythm first. For days, his silence had curled around the house like an uncertain breath, but that morning, something in his eyes shifted. He summoned Abigail without explanation and led her through hallways no servant had ever walked. The further they went, the dimmer the lights grew, until lantern flames seemed to bow away from the air itself. They stopped before a locked, handleless door near the northern wing. The paint around it was cracked like old veins, the wood swollen with secrets. When William turned the key, a sound no one in 10 years had heard, stale air exhaled, damp with the ghost of long-imprisoned memory. What lived behind that door seemed less a room than a wound that had yet to close. Ash still coated the windowsills. Soot climbed the walls in uneven scars. A blackened crib leaned against what might once have been a nursery wall. On the floor, a melted music box sat in silence, its keys fused by heat. This was the room that had ended him. 10 years ago, when the explosion meant for him tore through this wing, it devoured his world instead. The fire had taken his wife and his little girl, the only two faces that ever softened his voice. He had rebuilt the mansion over the ashes but sealed this door, forcing himself to live above their grave. Every night since, as others slept, his mind replayed the scream he couldn't reach. Abigail crossed the threshold as though drawn by gravity. The scent of smoke clung still, faint but unforgettable. Her hand brushed the remnant of a child's toy beside the crib, half-burnt, its painted eyes gone. When her fingers touched it, the world shifted. Heat pressed against the edges of her mind. The faint echo of a song, a lullaby, rose through the smoke of 10 years past. Her vision flickered with the image of fire, the sound of a man's voice shouting her name through chaos. "You carried me," something whispered deep inside her, not in language but in recognition older than memory. She recoiled, choking on air that wasn't smoke anymore but memory. William turned, his mask cracked open by the scent of ash. In her eyes, he saw something impossible, the reflection of that same fire, as if she had stood in it too. Abigail stumbled backward, her pulse roaring in her ears. When she reached the hallway, she pressed her palm to her chest, trembling at the phantom warmth still glowing there, and a single thought broke through the noise. She knew that room. Every silence hides a secret, and every secret has a heartbeat. What do you think Abigail will discover next? Share your guess, and join our community of story seekers by subscribing now. Night fell heavy, dragging thunder behind it like vengeance. Rain began as a whisper, then built into a purgatorial downpour that drowned the world in gray. The Dante estate flickered under flashes of lightning, its windows trembling as if the storm itself demanded confession. Outside, William stood bareheaded on the front steps, his black suit plastered to his skin. The rain didn't cool him, it scoured. He welcomed it, letting it carve through the ash tattooed to his soul. The image of Abigail in the burnt room haunted him, the way she'd recoiled, the shimmer of recognition in her eyes. She hadn't looked afraid of the horror. She had looked familiar with it. Each drop that struck him carried an old memory, the smell of smoke, the weight of his daughter's small hand slipping from his. He once thought grief was a punishment. Now he feared it might be a chain. Through the curtain of rain, a fragile shape approached, the faint outline of Abigail, her umbrella trembling in the wind. She stopped beside him, small and steady, sheltering him first before herself. Her hand shook, but she didn't pull away. Her presence tore something open in him that even fire couldn't reach. He felt the world blur, the rain mixed with tears he hadn't known he could still shed. A decade of restraint, violence, and guilt melted under the mercy of her silence. She said nothing, only stood close enough that he could feel the warmth beneath her cold fingers. In her quiet, there was no forgiveness offered, only space, the kind that allows the damned to breathe. Lightning shattered the sky in white veins, throwing their shadows across the marble steps. For the first time, William didn't see a monster in his reflection. He saw a man trying to grieve correctly, too late for redemption but hungry for its taste. Something dangerous stirred in that moment, not anger, not love, but the possibility of peace, which frightened him far more. The air around them felt charged, deliberate, aware. Between the low roll of thunder, the rhythm of her breathing anchored him. Within it, he heard a strange promise, as though the storm itself whispered that their stories were the same. When she finally stepped back, he followed her movement with the helplessness of a man facing resurrection. The rain fell harder, rinsing everything but the truth from the night. And somewhere inside both of them, the walls began to break. Peace in a house built from violence was never meant to last. It lingered only long enough for the walls to remember what silence felt like before fear returned to reclaim its throne. The men around William had begun to whisper again, and in their voices lived the same old poison, the belief that kindness was weakness and love was a trap that killed kings. Alessandro had listened to those whispers too long. He had followed William through war and blood. Through the fire that had taken the family neither dared to name anymore. But loyalty thrives only when it understands the reasons beneath cruelty. Lately, William's reasons had changed, and Alessandro could not forgive softness in the man he had worshipped as a god. He convinced himself that the Maid was a weapon, a rival family's trick meant to wrap the boss in delusion. And so he acted, as old soldiers do, with violence. The first bullet came at midnight. A crack of thunder disguised it for half a breath, then the mansion awoke screaming. Servants scattered into the darkness as gunfire tore through the elegant quiet. The storm outside mirrored the one within. Shadows flared against the walls like ghosts reliving their final burns. William moved toward the sound, no words, no hesitation. The calm that had softened him dissolved, precision returned like muscle remembering pain. By the time the thunder faded, the house was silent again. One shot ended it. Betrayal lay at his feet. Only the faint smell of gunpowder and the echo of broken trust remained. The silence that followed was heavier than death, sacred, final. He found Abigail crouched beneath the great staircase, her breath shallow, her sleeve dark with blood. For a heartbeat, terror splintered through his calm before he realized the blood was not hers. It was his. A stray bullet had grazed him without notice, its warmth spreading down his arm only now. As he sank beside her, she reached out with trembling fingers and uncurled her palm. Something small and silver rolled into the light, a ring. It glinted with familiar sorrow engraved words, catching the faintest reflection of lightning. Be the light we could not save. William's world tilted. He had lost that ring in the fire. Abigail's eyes filled with smoke that wasn't there. The scent of ash returned, vivid and merciless. Flames roared behind her gaze, and memory struck like lightning reborn. The fire, the collapsing beams, the desperate man with soot-streaked hands lifting her from the rubble and throwing her clear before the roof caved in. The ring slipping from his burned fingers as he vanished into the smoke. The small child who survived had never been buried in the ashes after all. She had come back, unknowingly, to the source of her nightmares, and to the man who once saved her life while losing his own soul in the process. The past was alive again, and this time it refused to stay quiet. For 3 days, the storm clawed at the mansion, battering the windows with furious hands, but nothing could shake the stillness that had settled inside. The tempest screamed and drowned the city below, yet the Dante estate, once a cathedral of unrest, breathed with fragile peace for the first time in 10 years. The fire of revelation had burned through every lie, leaving no place for shadows to hide. William moved through the corridors like a ghost relearning mortality, pale and hollow from what he'd remembered, and from what he could no longer deny. The new truth had carved him open, but through the wound came something he had forgotten existed: life. Abigail stayed by him, silent as ever, her hands steady as she cleaned the blood from his arm. The air between them was thick with everything unspoken: guilt, recognition, love that belonged to another lifetime. She touched him not as a servant, not even as a savior, but with the instinct of someone who had once reached for him through smoke. Neither spoke the word forgiveness. It simply existed there between them, trembling like a flame that refused to die. He had once believed sleeplessness was divine punishment, the cruel bargain struck by a man who had failed to save his family. But as her head came to rest lightly against his shoulder, he realized the truth had always been simpler and infinitely more painful. Sleep had been waiting, not for absolution, but for home. His eyelids fluttered with the weight of peace he had never dared to earn. Ghosts whispered through the walls, not as tormentors but as witnesses. Their sorrow hummed in the silence, a soft lullaby returning what fire had stolen. The great William Dante, ruthless ruler, devil of the underworld, closed his eyes not in defeat but in surrender. Outside, dawn unfolded shyly over the wet horizon. Pale light broke against the marble floors, painting the house with warmth it had not felt since before the flames. The mansion no longer looked haunted. It looked awake. Abigail's heartbeat steadied beneath his ear, slow and certain, guiding him into the first dream he'd had in a decade. On her hand, the silver ring caught the sunlight, its hidden inscription finally revealed. "To our daughter, Abigail, be the light we couldn't save." In that reflection lived every unspoken memory, and every life ended too soon. The world seemed to still, as if the universe itself paused to let the truth echo, just once, across time. He hadn't saved a stranger. She had been the miracle left in the ashes, returning to save what remained of him. Father and daughter, broken halves of a story fire tried to erase, now breathing in the same fragile peace. But peace never lasts in the world of men who have built kingdoms from blood. Beneath the floorboards, a phone vibrated, one call unanswered too long. In the city below, something moved, a rival family stirring in the void Alessandro left behind. New wars ignite from old silences. And somewhere deep in her sleep, Abigail twitched, eyes fluttering as if haunted by another dream entirely. In it, she stood before her father's portrait, only it wasn't the man beside her, it was someone else. A shadow smiled in the dark. The house had finally dreamed, but not all dreams are merciful. Every monster remembers the moment they stopped deserving love. Only a few ever learn they were loved all along. Part 2, The Daughter of the Devil Who Slept, coming soon. He thought he saved a stranger, but it was his daughter who saved him. Would you forgive the man who destroyed your world if he was the only one who ever fought to keep you alive? Tell me in the comments, and subscribe because Part 2, The Daughter of the Devil Who Slept, is coming soon.